Alright guys, so we are deep in the danger zone. The US trade war has made a very dangerous turn, and over the weekend, we have learned two very disturbing things. The first is how Scott Bessent, the US Treasury head, wasn't the architect of the tariffs. It was another group of people who pulled the trigger on this crazy plan. Now, this is of extreme importance because of who Bessent is. He's a billionaire and a former hedge fund manager for George Soros. Bessent understands the market and what makes the economy tick. That man is not stupid, he's the living embodiment of Wall Street in a suit. And here's the big crisis: Bessent might have just been a talking puppet. Reports are saying that he simply laid out the potential scenarios of how bad the collapse will be based on different tariff levels, and the decisions were made by Trump's inner circle. And this is simply insane. If that's true, it means Bessent was reduced to basically being ChatGPT generating answers for Trump's team. But it gets wilder. In a Bloomberg interview, Bessent admitted that he wasn't even part of the negotiations with other countries, and this might have been left to other members of the administration. And one name keeps coming up, and that's Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary who has a 500-point IQ in economics, a real American genius. And if you don't know who Lutnick is, here's a great introduction to how intelligent, how competent he really is.
Let's go try to figure out ways for the world to treat us more fairly and more properly. I don't think it's effective for the world to retaliate. I mean, those things are silly. We are the consumer of the world, right? We buy $20 trillion worth of goods, and we are basically the buyer of everybody else's in the world's items. So what is the point of them going higher? So that we go higher? I mean, come on, look, he gave a 50% discount. What he's saying is we need to rebuild American manufacturing base.
Now, if Lutnick was the engineer behind the tariffs, I can fully understand why things are starting to backfire in real time. We have world leaders all losing their minds and they're all bracing for impact. Giant economies like China are matching Trump's punishments, hitting back on all US exports with a 34% tariff. It's key we dive deeper because China can go head to head with Trump's economy and eventually outlast the US. It's the Russian equivalent of outlasting NATO, but in a setting of a trade war. Now, firstly, China doesn't need US imports as much as Trump thinks. Beijing imports mainly intermediate goods from the US, from soybeans and semiconductors to LNG and crude oil. China is not dependent on the US. Their purchase of American goods is the minority of their total imports. Beijing has diversified their supply chains to the point that a full trade embargo from either side is fine with them. China will simply import more from the BRICS partners like Brazil, Russia, and the UAE. But the US will lose vital revenue when the timing is simply horrible. We have numerous countries and foreign consumers boycotting American products. China stopping imports just adds more fuel to the fire. Now, Beijing has spent decades and trillions of dollars to flesh out their entire supply chains. Trump trying to speed run his reshoring exercise in half a year is going to crash and burn. Now, when we look at import dependence, the picture gets much clearer. China used to be dependent on the US for their imports, but since 2019, the whole situation has been flipped. US imports 18.5% of their total goods from Chinese suppliers. China's dependence on American imports is only 17% of their total. And as we surmised earlier, many of these goods can be replaced with other trading partners around the world. The same can't be said for the United States. Besides just the supply chains, China has more fiscal room than the US to strike back with stimulus. Trump can't inject money into the system when he wants to cut down the deficit. But Chinese bond yields are lower than treasury bonds. Borrowing money is out of the question for Trump but not for the Chinese. The US is on the back foot in this trade war, and we have to say this one more time. Trump has made a grave miscalculation. However, the US just refuses to admit it made a mistake. It's borderline delusional when you have Scott Bessent himself rejecting the notion of a US recession. And this goes against all indications of the US economy contracting, slowing down, and the American consumer on the brink of collapse. It's wild because he should know better. And here's a direct quote from Bessent, and I kid you not, This reeks of either pure ignorance or pure arrogance, and I still believe Bessent deep down is not a stupid person. He's trying to be a salesman, and he's doing a really horrible job at it. Now, he told NBC, I see no reason that we have to price in a recession. And here's why this statement is so disingenuous. Most people have no idea how bad the carnage will get. And when they hear this statement, it lulls people into a false sense of security. It's just as bad as the Federal Reserve telling everyone that inflation was transitory. Well, just give it a few quarters, guys. I suspect Bessent would have to eat his words. Now, rejecting the notion of a recession also means the White House believes they can win the trade war without real consequences. So don't expect Trump to U-turn on their tariff regime. We are still pedal to the metal. And if you are invested in the markets, well, Bessent has another bizarre statement for you. If you own stocks, you are screwed. I'm sure that will go down well with the markets.
More than 160 million Americans, Mr. Secretary, as you know, are invested in the market. Many of them have spent their lives saving for their retirement. What is your message to Americans who want to retire right now and who've just seen their lifetime savings drop significantly?
Well, Chris, I think that's a false narrative. Americans who want to retire right now, the Americans who have put away for years in their savings accounts, I think they don't look at the day-to-day fluctuations of what's happening. And, in fact, most Americans don't have everything in the market. Most Americans in a 401k have what's called a 60-40 account. That 60 of 40 accounts, they are down 5 or 6% on the year. People have a long-term view. They have a program that the reason the stock market is considered a good investment is because it's a long-term investment. If you look day to day, week to week, it's very risky. Over the long term, it's a good investment.
Now, I don't know what planet Bessent is on. There's a reason why people are invested in stocks. It's because the yield on treasury bonds doesn't keep up with the rate of real inflation. And I don't mean the CPI number from the BLS. We all know it's much higher than 2, 3, or 4%. Now, I can't believe I'm saying this, but maybe Janet Yellen wasn't that bad. Now, sure, she talked a lot about overcapacity, but at least she wasn't part of a global tariff war. However, the craziness just doesn't seem to stop. Now, just listen to what Bessent has to say about the Chinese buying gold. He still believes the Chinese economy is in a recession/depression and the RMB is about to collapse. But it's just more smoke and mirrors.
There are a lot of different stores of value over time. Bitcoin's becoming a store of value. Gold has historically been a store of value. I think what's interesting is, where do we see the gold demand coming from? A huge amount is from China.
Yes.
Where, as I said, they're in the middle of an economic recession/depression. People don't trust the Chinese currency because they have capital controls. There are 1.4 billion Chinese who all want to get their money out, and they won't let them. They will let them buy gold.
He's still missing the mark. Are some Chinese people afraid of a currency collapse? I'm sure they are. Some are definitely around. But the main reason they are buying is simply because gold is a global store of value. Now, firstly, US assets are starting to collapse. We have a trade war that threatens to destroy American corporate revenues. And you throw in a plan to cut down government spending, we have a disaster show for US stock earnings. It's not a surprise why Chinese money is flowing to gold ETFs in record amounts. China's bond yield is less than 2%, and their stocks are still facing the risk of Trump's trade war. That's the real reason why Chinese people are piling into gold. The RMB collapsing is not the main reason. China's retaliation on US exports is going to add more pressure on American stocks. We could reach a breaking point where even domestic US investors throw in the towel and they swap the S&P 500 for gold bullion. But here's what Bessent isn't telling the American people: that the real gold buying is from China's central bank. And if there's one thing to be worried about, is Beijing rejecting dollars to buy gold. They now hold almost 2,300 tons, and that's just what they want us to know. But regardless, the real concern for Bessent is China's gold holdings as a percentage of their total foreign exchange reserves. And before the Russia-Ukraine war, it was around 3.2%. It's at 6% today, almost doubling within 3 years. What do you think is getting displaced by gold? We don't need to look far. It's US Treasury bonds. China's buying gold at record highs, and the $3,000 price tag won't deter them. Now that Trump has launched his trade war on China, do you think Beijing will continue to buy US debt? Will they be silly enough to fund their own economic containment? Very simple question. And it's important to understand Trump and Bessent's end goal. It's a grand economic realignment where the US becomes the center of the universe once again, especially in critical industries.
I think we're also at a unique moment geopolitically, and I could see in the next few years that we are going to have some kind of a grand global economic reordering. There's something on the equivalent of a new Bretton Woods, or if you want to go back, like something back to the steel agreements or the Treaty of Versailles. There's a very good chance that we are going to have to have that over the next 4 years, and I'd like to be a part of it.
Now, my concern is why it's probably going to fail. They are speed running this like a video game and throwing the dice on the big gamble, on this big gamble. The problem is the odds are really slim. They need snake eyes to win, but the world is not complying. When you see Japan, Korea, and China working together, you know things are bad. And when G7 allies are hitting back, you know things are getting really rough. But this goes back to the big gamble. The US wants to reshape the entire global order quickly because they are the ones running out of cards. And here's the scary thing. We have no idea what this grand economic reordering will be over the next 4 years. But obviously the tariff war is a big component of this. Will we come to a point where the US works out a deal with China? Or does this mean gold comes back into the system as money? Or perhaps we are talking about the Mar-a-Lago Accord, where the US forces everyone to strengthen their currencies to devalue the dollar to help US exports be competitive again. And this is one big trend we need to observe and really get right. What is Trump's big reordering all about? And my guess is that Bessent and Trump wants a much weaker dollar to wipe out the national debt and export competitively once again. We have to work on the assumption that Trump understands the problem with a stronger US dollar. It's not good. Ever since the trade-weighted dollar started to rise, the USD became less competitive against other trading partners. And this coincides with the US losing a ton of manufacturing jobs, basically the hollowing out of US industries. The stronger the US dollar became, the less competitive US exports became, especially against other countries like Japan and China. So Trump's grand plan might be twofold. You wage a trade war and you raise tariffs to get US consumers to subsidize American manufacturing, get the domestic consumer to fund Trump's reshoring plan. Next will be a grand bargain to the world. If you want to trade with us, you must consume more and buy US production, which means country XYZ, you will have to strengthen your currency. There's no two ways about it. And this might be the grand plan, and if it is disastrous for the average person. It would mean massive currency devaluation and the destruction of real US bond values. Sure, you might get back the nominal value of your bonds plus all the interest coupons, but the real value, the purchasing power, will get inflated away by higher prices both domestic and foreign. And that might just be the end goal, so we have to watch out for more clues as the trade war plays out. And if that's the plan, guys, I'm running out to buy even more gold. But as always, let me know what you think. Will the US really dodge a recession this time? And is there even a plan behind Trump's tariff war? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these insane times.